All right, so forms. Submit 60 days before operating a new TP facility, 45 days for TTU, PBR. TTUs are covered by DTSE.
And one thing to keep in mind, much like any other checklist that somebody fills out, it's much more than the checklist. You know, what they're checking means something. They can't just, the facility should just be checking off the boxes, you know, posting it in. There's compliance that they have to achieve, right? There's operating procedures they have to follow, right? There's data that they and records that they have to keep, right? And if you take a look at the forms in more detail, inherent in the forms are additional operating requirements and limitations. So the forms themselves serve as a pretty good compliance awareness tool, along with the fact sheets.
So all tiers have a plot plan, of course, fees, PBR and CA, prior enforcement history, closure financial assurance, phase 1 environmental assessment. We talk more about that in detail? Okay, good. That is sent to the DTSC, not necessarily to the CUPAs. So that's an interesting little thing there. On PBR, tank and containment system certification. So under large quantity generator, you're required to do certain things on tanks. Under PBR, you're kicked into that as well. Even if you're not a large quantity generator, you still need to meet these requirements. Notification of a local agency and notification to the property owner.
Yeah, how many of you guys have done or reviewed hazardous waste tank integrity assessments? All right. It's for many, many years the CUPAs really didn't push the issue. It's only been in the last few years, you know, that we see it, and it's a real surprise to a lot of businesses. You know, and they say, what do I have to do for that integrity assessment? And in many cases, nowadays those tanks may be so old there's no way to do them because you can't seismically support them. They won't meet current seismic code. You know, it's a whole big issue with that, and they didn't do the tank training this time around. They did it last year. And there's the Cal CUPA Form Board Hazardous Waste Tags, Hazardous Waste Tank Integrity Assessment Guidance document that you should all be familiar with.
All right, so the phase 1 assessment, it's for PBR and conditionally authorized only. Intent, assist the owner-operator in identifying potentially contaminated areas of their facility which require further investigation or remediation. And they're sending this to the DTSC. It's basically being reviewed. If you say on there, oh yeah, we got problems, then DTSC is going to come out and they're going to ask for an assessment on the site for possible cleanup. The checklist is a process for evaluating the facility for contamination. So it needs to be filled out by somebody that's familiar with the site, has a lot of information. It's a long checklist. Qualitative and subjective, though, based on facility history and visual observations made during a walkthrough. And the walkthrough is being done by the facility.
Right. This is not your all-appropriate inquiry under CERCLA. This is not your phase 1 property assessment. This, you do not, actually you really don't use a consultant for this. You use the oldest person at your facility who can still walk. Because what you're really looking at is old, you know, sources of old contamination. And it applies to the entire facility, not just the hole where the tiered permit unit's going to go. Right? Did anybody show up to DTSC's phase 1, you know, assessment class, I think 2 years ago? Down here, if you did and you remember seeing their slides, they're showing the typical diesel dripping concrete staining, and like, oh yeah, that's what you marked down on the assessment form. We need to evaluate that. Are you insane? It's real subjective. I mean, consider this. You know, consider the intent here. It's very subjective. You start writing down every stained area at your property, you're going to get a knock on the door by DTSC and the water board with the B40 drill rig and the, you know, driving up the driveway. You really want to be careful on this thing and think about it before you send in. For no other reason to get yourself out of PBR. It's that. You know, it's tough to do.
Yeah. NCA, PBR,
Oh yeah,
NCA.
PBR and CA, you bet. You have a copy of this in your materials. You have a copy of the form along with the instructions, and it seems pretty straightforward, but it is really subjective. Mm-hmm. So just use caution with that. This is at a circuit board shop. This is looking in the hole of their secondary containment. This is the ammoniated copper etch system. There's a lot of blue going on here for the copper. But what you're looking at is the surface of the fiberglass, the polypropylene, polyethylene secondary containment system. So in doing this assessment, well, one, they ought to clean this thing up anyway, just because otherwise that's a contaminated, dry, wet floor. And then look at the plastic, make sure that's still in good shape. If it is, they're good to go. Not so much here. This was that evaporator that is actually covered under permit by rule. We did the closure on this, and we pulled this thing up, and we dug through the concrete. We took a bunch of samples. Because if you see this during the Phase 1 assessment, this is the stuff that you write down, because it looked pretty bad. At this shop, the fact that there's a crack right here in their secondary containment, and there's a little bit of impact to the concrete.
A little bit? They don't have concrete anymore. It's a gravel pit.
Well, it's pretty deep right there. But that's something that, if I were doing it, I'd write down. I don't think there's anything going into the subsurface, but, it looks bad. This one's hard to see with the lights. Driving down the street, I think this is down in L.A. near Onion Station. Empty drum storage area, right? Empty drums. Why are they storing them upside down? So rain doesn't get in them. I don't know why they don't cap them, right? So rain doesn't get in, but they're empty, right? And you see, there's
not
a
a shadow
here. That ain't a shadow. But it's standing, but what you notice is, again, if it'd be helpful if the lights were off for this one, but weeds, 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 no weeds, no weeds, no weeds, no weeds, 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 weeds. Oh, yeah. Pathway of contamination.
All right, basic tier permitting and operating requirements, hazardous waste generator requirements with a few tweaks, still have accumulation time, training, contingency plan, tank and container labeling, that's still required. Also must mark the exterior of each unit.
That should just be treatment unit.
Yeah, not TTU. So this is information that needs to go on the tanks. Other stuff the treater must have: inspection schedule and inspection records, copies of air, water permits and compliance records, residual management discard records. So you need to keep treatment records. Basically, even if you don't have any waste going off site, like the example we have with the resin, do they have anything manifested off with the resins? No, it's going to the trash. But do they have to track the volumes that they treat? Yeah, they still have to track that.
And that could just be a simple checklist: how many cans went in the trash. Just ding, 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 ding. One thing, in my experience, when you look at when you look at tiered permit facilities, their hazardous waste training is the generic, facility specific, but generic hazardous waste training. It's not training on the treatment system or the treatment system compliance requirements. That's sort of operational knowledge, but they ought to be training folks on that. And the contingency plan, typically in those facilities, or in most facilities, doesn't include process upsets in the treatment system. It's the typical, if we have a spill, we're going to run to the big end of the windsock. They really ought to have something for what the treatment operator does in the event of a process upset. All right, for all tiers, continuing stuff. Written operating procedures and instructions, and they're more detailed written operating procedures and instructions for conditional authorized and PBR facilities. Could this just be the instruction sheet bolted to the treatment system? You bet. Could it be the manufacturer's operating instructions? Sure. They don't have to write something specific, but during your inspection, are you going to ask to see it? Sure. You want to bet if they can find it? Well, it was here when we ordered it. Well, here it is, and it's all stained, and you can't read it. Implementation. Again, operating record, details of any spills, upsets for the last 3 years. Again, if it's a large quantity generator or at a PBR facility, tank integrity assessments. love that guy. All right. Tier-specific requirements.
All right. Clean closure for conditionally exempt after shutdown. That's basically it. They don't have to have any plan, and there's no certifications or anything. They basically have to clean up when they're done. CUPA notification post-closure. So they do have to tell the CUPA that they've closed the facility or the unit. For CE limited, only for oil water separators. Aerosol can puncturing no longer is under tier permitting. And then conditionally exempt specialized waste. Typically no volume limits, but very restrictive on eligible waste types and treatment methods.
For the conditional exempt small quantity treatment, again, no limit on the types of waste, but a fairly strict limit on the quantity of waste. And it's going to be like a drum per month per facility, relatively small. But one of the things with conditional exempt small quantity treaters, if there's any, they can't have a CESQT if there's any other tiered permit on site. All right, you should only, if there's CESQT, that's the only tier you should be seeing on site. That was the original CUPA Cup back at the first conference up in San Francisco. For laundries, how many of you guys do the inspections of laundry facilities, commercial laundry facilities? All right, for you three people. Now for the reusable soil textiles, oily rags, solvent rags, right? For the soil textiles, the generator, they can't be using when they send those off to the laundry. They can't be, for it to be considered a soil textile, they can't use that rag for spill cleanup. You could use the spill pad, not the rag that you're sending off to be laundered, right? Because otherwise it gets too much goo on it. No added hazardous waste. Well, I've got my bag of soiled textiles. I'll just throw a half a drum of oil in there. They can't do that. But remember, it's not limited to oily rags, solvent rags. EPA is still trying to get their solvent rag rule out, and it's only been, 8 years? And then the facility's leak-proof wash systems, biennial inspections, and of course the sludge from that washing operation may in fact be a hazardous waste.
All right, for conditionally authorization, we're kind of going up in requirements. We did the conditionally exempt, pretty minimal. As we get higher in the tiers, more requirements. So under conditional authorization, they need an annual waste minimization certification. So that needs to be sent to the CUPAs. Tank or containment integrity assessment. So if they have a tank or a containment system, that has to be certified by a independent professional engineer.
Independent qualified professional. Well, a qualified professional engineer in California is civil, structural, or geotechnical.
Right.
So my chemical engineer is looking for other work.
Yeah, question. It's based on the regulations found in 192. It's once every 5 years. They don't
or less depending on the condition of the tank.
Whatever
66,
the engineer says.
192.
So minimum 5, more if the engineer requires it. The Phase 1 environmental assessment checklist, records of violation settlements, financial assurance on closure costs. So now they're actually being required to provide some type of assurance that they're going to clean it up. As the hazards get higher, then the requirements go more. So now they're required to do financial assurance. That's pretty detailed. There was actually a class at the conference this year on that. More detailed operating instructions than conditionally exempt. Recognition response to upsets. What's CP implementation?
Contingency plan.
Oh boy. And you couldn't just type that out. Determination of treatment effectiveness. It would have.
The stuff I do type out, I screw it up.
It's so. Oh, slow. I'm sorry.
Killing me.
I'm only whining about it.
You're electro-whining about it. All right, permit by rule. Basically the same requirements for conditional authorization, but a written closure plan, not just a closure cost estimate. How are they going to do closure? What steps are they going to take? And we're going to, how and when is it going to be closed? I don't know, pick a date. Estimate the maximum waste in storage and treatment. Well, we think when we shut everything down, we're going to have X amount in storage, X amount in the treatment system. How long it's going to take to close each unit and the expected date, and annual notification to the CUPA. Basically, you have to keep up on the forms and submit them. You do not have to, in doing the closure plan, you do not have to assume that the ground is contaminated. You can assume, or you can make the assumption that you're going to do the evaluation, you're going to take samples, maybe you dig through the concrete, but you don't have to assume for the cost or for the plan that the stuff leaked. Because otherwise, your estimate's going to be, well, we're going to dig 30 yards of dirt and it's going to cost us $400,000. You don't have to do that. You could assume that everything's hucky-duck.
Run, Forrest, run.
Run, Forrest, run. All right, you have to have a written waste analysis plan. Specifically, what waste is going in? How do you know it's hazardous? What kind of sampling you're going to do? I've seen some PBR documentation where they just have as their waste analysis plan copies of the POTW monitoring records. Well, that's not even close. Right? That's not the stuff going in. Tank integrity assessments have to be submitted to the CUPA every 5 years, or whenever the PE determines. You have to update the closure cost annually, and typically you get, I always forget, I forgot the website back in the office, but it's basically based on by the Department of Commerce inflation index. I've been in a recession so long. Anyway, what's interesting is in the regulations, the requirement to have operating instructions isn't there. That looked like an omission to me. And believe me, I know them when I see them. I never correct them, but I know them when I see them. Annual waste minimization certification requirements also missing in the regulation. It happens. And if the CUPA wants a detailed annual report as to how much, what you're treating, what you did with it, you, the CUPA, can request it of you, the industry, every year. In the written waste analysis plan, you can see the requirements in 67.450.3 CAA, and basically, they're how you're going to analyze the waste. What criteria are you going to use? You have to include for each waste stream in your waste analysis plan that bit of information, and the facility has to follow the plan. A lot of facilities have goon consultants like me write their waste analysis plan, and I talk it over with them, and I hand it to them, and hopefully they get paid, and then they stick it on the shelf. And you, the CUPA, go by, well, show me all your waste analysis records. We don't need no stinking records. Let me see your waste analysis plan. Flip, flip, flip. Well, show me this. We have no idea. What's that you're looking at? Very, very common. So, you talk to the facility operator, and I don't know what's in there. We pump this elsewhere. We don't know. Well, your waste analysis plan says you're going to do X, Y, and Z. This is an interesting one. This is a relatively simple wastewater treatment system that would typically fall under, I think this one was originally going to be a conditional authorized system. But remember in our process flow diagrams, we saw, mixed acids going in, through one line, which maybe looks like one pipe. These are the influent pipes that are going to be going into this tank. Yeah, gee, what a fun waste analysis plan that is. Operating instructions, right? And again, while you're reading, this could be, and again, what we're posting on the calcupa.net website, copies of the complete handouts and full-page color PDFs of the slides. So if you want to look at color, knock yourself out. But anyway, they need to have operating instructions. And they need to be familiar with them, and they need to be available. Couple of things. Hey, look, that's my backyard.
Sampling.
Oh, you think your job stinks. They actually do this.
That's a job.
It is a job.
So
But I don't know which is the creepier job.
we got a typical process going on here, and we've got all different types of waste streams. You know, a lot of times people are looking at this waste here, what's going out. But for tiered permitting, you need to look at waste streams going in. So for the analysis here,
Yeah, there's 3 waste streams going in here. Waste 1.
4.
No, waste 1, waste 2,
Waste 3.
I'm trying to burn a hole through you.
Yeah, waste
oh, yeah.
4.
What is with me and looking at lines? Anyway.
So there's several, and you need to have analysis on all of these waste streams going in. Because again, when we were going through the flow chart, did the analysis matter? Yes.
Yeah.
So it's not just what happens at the end. Oh, we ship it out as hazardous waste. You know, we cover all our bases. Yeah, but what was it going in?
You know, and some of this is you're going to be sampling at A, C, D, I to see, is it a hazardous waste? What kind of hazardous waste is it? How much, so you know what tier you fall under. You're going to be sampling at, or they're going to be sampling at L and at K and at G to figure out if they're in compliance with their wastewater discharge permit and as part of their wastewater permit requirements. They're going to be sampling, hopefully, they're going to be sampling at B, at F, at E, at H, at J, and at M. That hurt?
I felt that.
The new one I'm getting, Bud, it would burn a hole. Anyway, that would, you're going to be sampling there to find out, 1, are you going to blow up when you combine those waste streams? 2, you know, if not, what's happening chemically, physically to see if that connection combination is tiered permitting, right? So where are they going to need to use a DTSC certified hazardous waste lab? No, everything except for the discharge. The discharge, they use a county sanitation lab. But they really should be sampling. Now, you know, if it's a fairly simple waste stream, you know, coming in from E and B, they still need to know what B and E and all those other post-treatment waste streams are, just to make that determination. And it's not a bit, you know, from the facility side, you don't have to send in, you know, you're really sending in your waste analysis plan, or if you have your waste analysis plan, that really mainly hits A, C, D, and I. You should be including the commingling streams in your waste analysis plan. Not clear that it's required. You, the CUPA, can certainly ask about that. Well, tell me what's happening when you combine them. We just connect them and they get more flow. You know, we're going to need you to tell us more specifically, chemically and physically, what's happening there so we can make a determination. I've already hit the stationary waste systems for CA, PBR, and large quantity generators. You know, take a look at the CalCUPA hazardous waste tank integrity assessment guidance document. Lots of good information, flow charts. This also may be a surprise to a lot of facilities. And they talk about that in the advanced class because these are the issues you're looking at: the wet floors, the crusty crud, you know, in the process tank. No seismic issues here. Certainly. No seismic issues here. Piping this thing around. You know, here's the treatment system. You know, assessing a fiberglass tank and a couple of barrels. You know, looking at this facility, not secured. Not secured, and crud and crusties on the wall.
And no bolts. The footings
no
there.
bolts.
There's a hole, but no bolt.
Yeah. This took a little bit to retrofit for it to be properly certified. And if you see a relatively recent hazardous waste tank integrity assessment PE certification on something that looks like that, I wouldn't say you're challenging the engineer, but that's like a retired engineer who's looking for booze money, you know, selling a stamp. Does that happen? Oh yeah. Because I've hired half now. Oh, look at how nice those systems are. Now, what if for the integrity assessment, you know, they get manufacturer's information about, you know, here's how it's built. That's not a PE assessment. It has to be a separate independent. Again, seismic issues, nice system they're going to be looking at. Not so nice.
Financial
assurance. Hey, man's honest. Right, remember, financial assurance that applies to the closure cost estimate for conditional authorized and PBR terms. You have to include the estimate. Now, in the requirements, if the closure cost estimate has been completed and the total estimate is under $10,000, there's an exemption and no financial mechanism is needed, no letter of credit, no money in the bank. How many closure cost estimates do you think you're going to see that are $9,950? Almost all of them, right? In the closure cost estimate, they really should be putting down the basis for that. Well, we're going to clean the tanks and do, okay, how are you going to clean the tank? Well, we're going to get a couple of guys to hose out the tanks. How much do you pay these guys an hour? How many hours is it going to take them? You know, what's the cost of water and power? I mean, you really want to justify it in there, and it has to be documented. And there are very specific financial mechanisms required. If you look on the Certification of Financial Assurance, it tells you what those mechanisms are, and you have to write all that stuff down. They need to staple $100 bills to this thing.
And those are difficult for the Coupas to maintain. So if anybody has these, I highly recommend going. The DTSC has a lot of resources. Make sure you're covered. They talked about in the class, they had financial assurance, but it was somehow not quite set up properly. When they set these accounts up, the money should only be accessed by the Coupa. The company went into bankruptcy. They somehow robbed all of the financial assurance money and vacated the facility, ended up becoming a federal Superfund site.
Just like redevelopment agencies. All right. Oh, yeah, there it is. It's the implicit price deflator. And that better not be happening to my wife's.
And just a little note on that. This implicit price deflator usually comes out in April. They're required to update their closure costs under PBR by March 1st. Difficult to do this. What the DTSC has allowed is you can use third quarters for each year. So it's the previous year and the year before, the real difference between the two.
It tells you what those mechanisms are, and you have to write all that stuff down. They need to staple $100 bills to this thing.
And those are difficult for the Coupas to maintain. So if anybody has these, I highly recommend going. The DTSC has a lot of resources. Make sure you're covered. They talked about in the class, they had financial assurance, but it was somehow not quite set up properly. When they set these accounts up, the money should only be accessed by the Coupa. The company went into bankruptcy. They somehow robbed all of the financial assurance money and vacated the facility, ended up becoming a federal Superfund site.
Just like redevelopment agencies. All right. Oh, yeah, there it is. It's the implicit price deflator. And that better not be happening to my wife's.
And just a little note on that. This implicit price deflator usually comes out in April. They're required to update their closure costs under PBR by March 1st. Difficult to do this. What the DTSC has allowed is you can use third quarters for each year. So it's the previous year and the year before, the real difference between the two. And as long as it's third quarter, you can do that.
Yeah, and again, you should be looking at the closure cost estimate to make sure that the factors that are in there in the documentation is worthwhile.
Right. So the plans, removal of the waste, treatment, disposal of waste and residuals, decontamination, demolition, and removal of the treatment unit, transportation to an authorized facility, the labor, materials, and equipment, sampling and analysis. Remember, it's confirmation. You're not automatically trying to figure out what it would, if there is any contamination. Remediation costs if required. They shouldn't be. The key thing that's often forgotten is a PE signature certificate of closure for the PBR. Now, it doesn't have to be independent for that one.
Right.
But
and it doesn't have to be a qualified engineers. So my chemie actually can make beer money signing.
Exactly. And
That's all I'm paying them to.
written closure plan for PBR.
And there's a fact sheet. And I know you can't read this, but this is just an example of a closure cost estimate that we did. It's not better or worse than anybody else's. It's one example. That's all. But it's all detailed. Monopoly money, but it's all detailed. Now, this was an interesting thing. What about if you have a tiered permit treatment system and you decide, hey, I can replumb this thing and now make it an exempt recycling unit? Can you just, can the facility just call you the coop up and say, hey, look what I just did. I don't have to turn in the forms anymore. Can you exclude me from the program? The problem is, and Kalman went all through this with me, and he talked to DTSC. If the facility was erroneously in tiered permitting, they never really should have been in. They made the mistake. There's no they don't have to go through closure. They could just get rid of everything or convert it and be done. But if they're righteously in PBR, righteously in tiered permitting, and the facility converts it to internal recycling, they have to go through a closure plan. They have to implement their closure plan and have an enforceable agreement. We had a facility that actually had that, and working with the local agency, we're like, look, we're not going to demolish everything, move it out of the way, buy the same thing new, put it back. We can't do that. So we got an enforceable agreement signed by the agency and the facility that, okay, we're not going to go through closure now, but later on, even though the recycling system is not captured or no longer captured in tiered permitting, whenever we do close, we'll keep the closure plan in place and updated, the closure cost estimate in place, and financial assurance in place. And that was kind of a couple of hoops, but not that tough. Well, if there's no closure required, and then like if it's conditional exempt and it's just clean closure, they would contact the agency. You'd go by there. Yeah, look, your system looks pretty clean. You're out of the program. All right, couple of quick inspection tips because I know we're late on time.
Yeah, we got 3 minutes, and we got to let them go.
Anyway, let's just see a couple of pictures. Well, it's not a picture. There's some DTSC inspection guidance. It's 14, 15 years old. You have a copy of it. It's still useful. A little old.
Step up to the counter. What's in the Coupa files? What is in the facilities files? What documents can you see there? But then also, what documents are not going to be in the file? Who do you need to talk to? Those are things you want to prepare. What kind of questions are you going to ask?
Yeah, I mean, you want to talk to the process operator. You want to talk to the waste treatment operator. You want to talk to the folks that are sending stuff in.
Step 2 in the field. What do you do before you go out? What stuff do you need to bring? What stuff do you need to look at? What documents are you going to review? We can go on and on. We don't have time.
All right. Anyway, their evacuation performance was mighty impressive. You do need to field verify, right? The drawings look good. You go out in the field and you're like, oh, look how nice that looks. There's no labels on the tanks. There's a label
marking on the pipe.
It's hard to see, but that beautiful blue copper stalactites on that thing. Signs on the tanks. Remember the unit number, EPA ID number? Print yourself up some piece of paper, laminate it down over there at FedEx Kinko's. This is one where they have a bunch of hoses and little piping. This is going to be a challenge looking at the process flow diagram because it looks like there's connections all over the place, very easily switched around. It's not really hard plumbed in the normal sense. It has hoses that are connected. So that makes verification a little tough. The sludge behind the unit.
Wow.
Getting into tight spaces, seismic restraints, tight spaces in containment. But again, you look at some of these pipes and you look at some of the systems, it's really going to take a while to do your walk down and really understand the nature of the system.
You're done.
Does that contain?
He's
Dropped my flask. Is that containment adequate? Oh, a couple of bricks. Oh, that's dirty. That's Terry. Look how happy he is. Look how happy he is. He should be wearing some gloves. Wet floor documentation that they cleaned it. Hey, is that an eye wash with submarine handles? No, they're going up to the roof. Oh, no. They're going into these things. Hey, look at the hole in the tank. Yeah, look at the glove. Where's the waste treatment operator?
He melted.
All right, there's an example of part of a closure report and certification. So you can take a look at that. Schools have PBR for that. Okay, there's a lot of exemption stuff we talked about. Lab treatment, there's all the conditions. Other special cases, we talked about a lot of these. That's Terry. Look how happy he is. Look how happy he is. He should be wearing some gloves. Wet floor documentation that they cleaned it. Hey, is that an eye wash with submarine handles? No, they're going up to the roof. Oh, no. They're going into these things. Hey, look at the hole in the tank. Yeah, look at the glove. Where's the waste treatment operator?
He melted.
All right, there's an example of part of a closure report and certification. So you can take a look at that. Schools have PBR for that. Okay, there's a lot of exemption stuff we talked about. Lab treatment, there's all the conditions. Other special cases, we talked about a lot of these. Any questions? I tell you. Hey, anybody wants copies of it, just give me a call.